Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, welcome to Medics Voices, where we interview interesting thought leaders in health and medicine. I'm Lucy O'Hagan. I'm a GP and writer from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and today I am delighted to be speaking with Glenn Colquhoun. He's a New Zealand poet and writer, and he's also a GP working in youth health. So Glenn, let's go back to the beginning. You had a really interesting sort of journey into medicine. How did that happen?
Yeah, I came late to medicine, I suppose. I thought I was gonna. I started off training to be a minister in a small church that I grew up in, the Seventh-day Adventist church, and the church for some reason thought that was not a good idea to allow me to be a minister. So they asked me to reconsider my calling, which I'm still doing, and I wandered off and did an English degree, which I loved, and but I don't know. I think there's a few different influences. Um, there's a there was um, always an ethic of service, I guess, growing up in the church I did. So I think that was there. But also when I studied English, I fell in love with learning. I thought it was the most smart. School was a bit wasted on me, but university was like, oh my God, you can know these things, you know. And I was in the flush of wanting to understand the world around me, and I thought medicine would be endlessly interesting. And yeah, so those two things kind of drew me to it. I'm not sure they're the things that kept me in it, but they are the things that took me there.
You've got a degree in English literature, but you also are a real science nerd. You're a total
Yeah, I
science
am.
nerd.
Yeah, well, I think science is some of the most beautiful poetry, you know. I remember a physics lecturer because I didn't really do physics um, after, well, ever, like, after about high school. And I remember him teaching us in first year of medicine how to derive the amount of energy released by a hydrogen electron or a helium electron as it skipped in orbit, in orbital. And he derived it from first principles on the board and explained it then and the maths of it. And I thought it was the most elegant thing I'd ever seen. It really was. And just, yeah, and to be able to describe behavior in such small detail and and the intellectual leaps, it was just pretty, you know. Or Maxwell's equations. You know, I remember writing some poetry translations of Maxwell's equations, and they're just stunning. And for a short time, I understood them. Um, but yeah, absolutely.
You still must have started writing poetry when you did your English degree, did you? Because in 2003, your third poetry collection, called Playing God, received the Montana Poetry Award, which is very big in New Zealand, and has gone on to sell over 10,000 copies, which is phenomenal in New Zealand, especially for a book of poetry. And I know it's hard going back to things that you wrote over 20 years ago, but it is a wonderful collection of reflections on the human complexities in the consultation. And in my view, it's had a profound impact on generations of New Zealand medical students and doctors. Can you tell us a bit more about that book and maybe read one of the poems?
I guess, yeah, well, it was in my, you know, at the beginning of my poetry career, really. And I don't know. I was sitting in a because I'd studied English literature and I loved poetry and I'd always really deep down wanted to be a poet. I think for whatever reason, you know, um, and but never really had the confidence and had written a smattering of poems. I was sitting in a lecture by a cardiac surgeon on the anatomy of the human heart. I mean, how metaphorical can that be? And I was in third year medicine, and you're drowning in the tortuous pathways of the 12 cranial nerves through um, every foramina in the human skull. And I knew them because I got quite good spatial memory. And I thought, wow, yeah. And I knew all the names of those things and what they did and how to test for them. I was just teeming with facts, the origins and insertions of every muscle in the human body. It's innovation and action. And but I was drowning in fact. And he he gave us an anatomy lecture, and then he put a poem up at the end of the lecture. And of course, we were all copying the poem down, thinking it would be in the exam, until someone said, "Sir, will we be tested?" And he said, "No, no, put your pens down." Um, he said, "This has got nothing to do with medicine. It's just to remind you that there's much more in the world than studying anatomy, and take some time to reflect while you're being students." I thought it was a deeply human thing to do, and it was. I wish I could remember the poem, but it was a kind of English pastoral poem about a landscape, and it was beautiful. And I just stopped in my tracks, and I thought, if I don't write, yeah, I might never. If I don't write now, I might go down this other path and drown. So I started to write, and for whatever reason. Maybe I had more frontal lobe. I just kept up with it, and from that point on, I developed a discipline of writing, I suppose, and yeah, and playing God grew out of those early years of writing, and I was writing about the things I was seeing, which was medicine, and it's a really, yeah, it's a book that I always read with a red pen now because it's early, and I'm like, why did I write that? Um, But at the same time, it's an accurate reflection of my doubt. I was always a nervous doctor. I always thought I would do the wrong thing, and so I was a bit terrified as a young doctor. Um, and as a not that I'm any less terrified as an old doctor. Um, so I'll read you a poem um, from Plain God. It's called When I Am in Doubt. When I am in doubt, I talk to surgeons. I know they will know what to do. They seem so sure. Once I talked to a surgeon. He said that when he is in doubt, he talks to priests. Priests will know what to do. Priests seem so sure. Once I talked to a priest. He said that when he is in doubt, he talks to God. God will know what to do. God seems so sure. Once I talked to God. He said that when he is in doubt, he thinks of me. He says, I will know what to do. I seem so sure. And that's kind of been my medical career, really.
So you've also written books of essays, children's books, sea shanties,
Jackie, thank you,
experiences.
Jackie, please. Kissed a girl and made her sneeze. Didn't he shake the Sheila's knees and the Afi tears squeeze? Hey ho, how the wind blows. Hey ho, over far. Shall we talk about sea shanties and not medicine? Yeah,
Well, sea shanties are part of our sort of whakapapa or ancestry of poetry, aren't they?
absolutely,
They're kind
yeah.
of really interesting to go there. But the other interesting thread in your work is around your experience living and working in Te, which is a rural Maori community when you were very young. Can you just tell us about how that has influenced your life, that experience in the Maori
Yeah,
world?
look, yeah, it changed my life. In New Zealand, we have this idea. this concept of the overseas experience, the OE, we're a small country left off the map. So we, we all fly out when we can to see what's on the map. And but in many ways I did my OE in my own country. So I grew up in a place where I was influenced a lot growing up by Māori and Pacifica culture. I always wanted to know how things worked in the Māori world where when Māori were running it, if you know what I mean, rather than in the city which was dominated by European structures. So I lived in this small community for a while and people were so good to me and so kind and I just saw a different way of living. It made me pine as a New Zealander of European extraction. It made me pine for the indigenous experience, for feeling connected to land, because I feel like that's all in us, that we are all tribal, but that in some way that had been bleached out of my family's experience over generations. And so living in that community, I felt that tribalism and that connection to the animate world, where a Māori worldview doesn't see the inanimate as dead; it will see everything as having some sort of life force. And as a poet, I love that as an old Seventh Day Adventist boy cast forth out of the church into utter darkness. I I love the tribalism, because the church was tribal. Um, yeah, and then of course, there are Maori communities all through New Zealand, and I just wanted to go and work in those communities, because our health system in New Zealand hasn't, has re has done a very poor job of meeting the needs of Māori, as most sort of health systems have throughout the world with Indigenous people. So there was always lots of work to do and incredibly generous communities to work within. So, and that sea shanty, you think I'm just being disruptive, but that sea shanty grows out of my experience working with Māori, and living with Māori because Māori have this amazing oral culture of poetry. So it's an existing oral poetic tradition. And it made me realize that our own poetry in English was once an oral tradition, and that poetry itself is an oral medium. And so in response to that, I went back and I looked at some of the oral forms of poetry, and my enjoyment of sea shanties grew out of that because I wanted to see, can they hold the energy of a haka, you know? Whiti, whiti, toa, whiti, whiti, toa, ka eki te wiwi, ka eke te wawa, you know? Hinny pretty, hinny pie, fell in love, but who knows why? So I think it's Māori have pointed me back to what is earthy, real, spirited in my experience of being Pākehā or European in New Zealand.
Oh, and also it's a very powerful spiritual tradition when
Yeah.
you've left the church, and I think very powerful for young people in New Zealand today who are seeking some sort of sense of spirituality in a very hostile world.
Yes, but it doesn't filter that spirituality into specific Ten Commandments or a God, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a spirit, it's pagan in that sense,
yeah,
beautifully pagan.
yeah,
It's about the animus and spirit in all things. And
yeah.
it enters my medicine because I bring those people with me. Māori would bring their dead with them. They're not considered on the other side. And since those experiences, I've grown to adopt that worldview of having my dead with me in consultation. My dad, my wounded dad, who died, you know, 20, 20 odd years ago, whenever I see a wounded man who's half good and half on the way to good, I think I need my dad in the room. He has the vernacular. He is a builder, and grew up on a farm, and he has the vernacular of men. So when I'm with them, when I'm with a kuia Māori, an old Māori person, I have Auntie Rongo with me, my neighbour from Titi where I used to live. And she sits there, yes, boy, yeah, yeah, kia ora, yes, giving me the energy I need to be with those people. I have young people with me. They fly around me like birds. And I also can then more easily intuit, I think, the ghosts other people bring with them into
Yeah.
the room. I mean,
Yeah.
we palpate abdomens, but we
Yeah.
also palpate spirits,
Yeah.
if you've been around long enough. And you know that crucible of the consultation so full of teeming energies. And it working with Māori it gave me models for knowing what I was seeing when I was exposed to the consultation.
And the whole idea that the person has a Maori, which is their sort of energy, and that you're sensing that. And
Yeah,
they're sensing your Maori, and there's a Maori in the room as well, which is about all of the ancestors and all of the
yeah,
other people and other
yeah.
stories that are in the room. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get caught continually between trying to be a man of science and going, is there a physics we just haven't explained for what's in the room?
Yeah.
You know? And the poet who's like, nah, it's just all in the room. The metaphor is the reality. Um, and I don't know. I just feel so incredibly real. And also, it has predictive value. If I use those models, if I think of the birds, I find the soreness, I find the secret pain. I go, yes, is it sore here? Can you tell me about this? We wait a little bit longer here, and all of a sudden, and you go, oh, that's a pretty important piece of information. Um, so it has real predictive value, that that model of birds flying. And sometimes I think the real magic is done between the birds. That bird's talking to that bird, and we're just actually chatting about something to keep this connection happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you then extrapolate that over time, so that if you see the same patient, they see you, and the birds get to know each other over years. Oh my God, because then you have then, the tenderness that can fill the room is remarkable, and the medicine that people are to each other can play out, because we squeeze stuff out of leaves and we rub bark on people and we find medicine in plants for ourselves, and plants are medicine to each other. And I think it's the same in human beings. We rub off on each other, you know. Um, Man, if you want to study something for the rest of your life, it's just aren't we so lucky
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
have the consultation? No one ever talked to me about the consultation in medicine.
Love you to describe your room. You've described the Maori of your room, but your room
Mm.
is actually something quite special in its physicality. And you work in a youth health clinic in a very small town in the Horowhenua district of New Zealand. And I'd love you to describe that room.
Oh
And
man, I love my room. It's got a big round yellow table. which I first saw in Palmerston North Library and thought I've got to have one of those. It's got the smallest like computer screen I can find. Yeah, so it doesn't get in the way. And the writing is so small I have to go like this when I type. But it it's full of color. I've got lots of medical models, skeleton. I've got a lightsaber above me. And whenever I don't know what to do, I turn on the lightsaber to to see to see if the force will be with me. Um, I've got Thor's hammer, and all the kids just want to pick up Thor's hammer. I've got lots of um, superheroes, the Virgin Mary, statues that represent like all our hopes and dreams, all our archetypes, a bookcase full of books, lots of toys on the table to represent things. In youth medicine's lots of talking medicine, and it's like in young developing minds. So sometimes they don't have words for things. So if you can take out some toy soldiers to represent things or some minions to represent things, um, a whiteboard, which is the joy of my life because I'm always drawing on it and pictures and arrows and making lists on it. And so it becomes, it's got a couch on one side and a big tupper cloth. Um, I've got Wonder Woman's shield, yeah, for protection, dinosaurs, old cut off feet. Halloween sort of bloodied feet hanging from the ceiling. My plinth is made from um, an old builder's bench that I got a squab made up for the top of it. So it's still got a vice in it. So I sometimes when the young people lie in it, I pretend I'm going to tighten the vice up around their foot or their arm. Um, so lots of humor in the room, lots of color. We have prayer flags hanging from the ceiling, rows of prayer flags. And if there's a young person whose energy we want to hold and they want to be held there, we clip their name to the prayer flag so that they're thought of and their energy stays in the room and they know there's a place where their name is kept. Um, And there's a couple of Labradors that wander around in the waiting room looking for love, because that's the life of a Labrador. It's kind of like a poet. We just look for love everywhere. Nobody cares. Yeah, the saddest of dogs, they're natural poets. Again, the room started as a way of making myself happy. So many doctors' rooms just look like shopping malls all around the world. It's like stamp, doctor's room, shopping mall, shopping mall. They all look the same, airports. And it's like I just wanted it to be a place I was happy to come to. But what I found is that it made a massive difference to how young people sit and relax. And I get asked a lot, are you a real doctor? Because they just think we should be like not laugh and we should be wear proper clothes and white coats and be slightly miserable and a little bit tense. And but yeah, so often the room and the Labradors relax the young people so much, and I can see a marked difference. And it was an accident, and one day again, I'd like to write about just how we set up our rooms and the opportunities we miss as doctors to communicate spirit, yeah, to communicate spirit to young people.
There's a book that sort of has arisen out of that room, really, called Letters to Young People. Tell us
Yeah.
about that poetry.
The experience of working with young people um, is sometimes of trying to provide some clarification about the world of grown-ups. So I find myself trying to explain things from time to time and then waking up in the middle of the night thinking, I wish I had said that better. And I started by writing, and sometimes poetry says things better than, there was a couple of young people I worked with, and I just couldn't sort of connect through the messages. They really challenged me in terms of why they should continue to live, you know. They were pretty sad. Um, and 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 I'd run out of all my traditional medical tools, so I wrote to them about why I thought life was worth living uh, in a poem, and gave it to them. Um, and And that sparked me thinking, what else would I write to my young people if I wrote them poems? So I started to do that. And at some point, it became a poetry project as well as a medical project. And I would write young people poems. And then I would call them up and I would say, can you come and see me? And they thought they would have some terrible disease. And I said, no, I've written you a poem. And I wanted to give it to you. And they would, there'd just be this silence on the end of the phone as they figured out what they were supposed to say in reply. But they would come in and I would give them their poem. And I collected those poems together in a book called Letters to Young People. And when I published them, I asked those young people for permission to publish their poem. And yeah, overwhelmingly they were happy, and overwhelmingly they didn't want me to. I changed all their names, and overwhelmingly, like about 90% of them said, no, I want you to change it back. And I said, look, there's some big stories here, but they're like, that's my poem, and I want people to know that's my story. I think so often we're often looking at patients and all that's wrong with them that we don't look at ourselves and that we don't see that we are a culture of doctors and that we have a psychic shape that falls all over the consultation and disturbs it, and that we are as in need of help and care and humanity as the people in front of us. And if we can't see ourselves, we won't change. We just think we're right. We keep coming from this unquestioned, hidebound way of practicing medicine that no one really decided on. Everybody just did it because that's the way they got taught to do it. And if we don't look at ourselves talking, we don't grow. We don't see how the consultation could be different. Yeah.
Brings us
And
to another book of yours, actually, called Late Love. Sometimes doctors need saving as much as their patients. This is a story of redemption. And that's been absolutely inspirational, Glenn. I just love the way you talk about the consultation like a poet, but you also
mm,
have a science nerd in there,
mm.
and that combination is absolutely captivating. I'm going to finish by reading something from this book, which is about when we don't know what to do. Most of the time, I have no idea what to do with them or what to say in response to them. It helps to know that I'm as hopelessly lost as my young people, though. What I might try to do is to keep my eyes wet and check for fantails or look for animal faces. I might even send out the spooks with a deck of cards or a pack of jet aeroplanes. And if nothing else helps, I might just have to cling on, take a deep breath, and let the storyteller know that I think they're awesome. And have I told them lately that they're awesome? And have they ever realised that they're awesome? And if only they knew how awesome they were. Until with a steady slap, 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 the sea closes sweetly over both our heads, and all we thought we knew at last becomes all we thought we knew. Tēnā koe, Glenn.